The paper was already on the counter when Benjamin arrived that Tuesday morning, 3 minutes before the office opened. It was a standard inter-office envelope, the kind with the string closure and the grid of names on the front where the previous senders had crossed out their own and written the next. His name was at the bottom of the grid, in Audra's handwriting, which he recognized by the way she pressed too hard on the downstrokes. He did not open it immediately. He set his bag under the counter, straightened the stack of intake forms that the evening shift had left in a sliding pile, and poured water from the small carafe he kept on the shelf behind the counter. Then he opened it. Inside was a single page on district letterhead, a formal misconduct notice signed by Audra in her capacity as senior supervising clerk, addressed to the magistrate's office, with a copy notation in the lower left corner, indicating that a second copy had already been filed with the district administrator. The subject line read, Performance and Conduct Review, Clark B. Lewis. The body cited a filing error from the previous month, described it as a pattern, and used the word negligent twice. Benjamin read it twice. He folded it back along its original crease and set it on the counter, paper side down. He had been standing at this counter for 6 years. He knew the grain of the laminate surface by the pressure of his palms. He knew which fluorescent tube above the waiting area flickered at 40-minute intervals. He knew the filing cabinet in the back room whose second drawer stuck unless you lifted the handle at a slight upward angle before pulling. 6 years of intake forms, fee receipts, notice packets and case numbers. And he had made, in that time, maybe a dozen errors he could name and own. He could not own this one completely, and that was the part that sat at the base of his chest like a stone that had not yet decided whether to settle or rise. The error had been in the Delmont property filing 4 weeks before, a misfiled deed acknowledgement that had caused a 3-day delay in a routine title transfer. The intake form on which the error originated had passed through 2 sets of hands before reaching the record system. Benjamin's hands had been one of those sets. Audra's had been the other. He had not raised that fact when Audra first addressed it at the staff morning meeting, while Patrice stood near the back counter folding notice envelopes and keeping her eyes on the paper in front of her. He had not raised it, because raising it would have required a conversation he did not know how to finish. Audra held the supervision log. Audra was the one whose name appeared on the sign-off column, and Audra's husband was Councilman Harlan Voss, whose name appeared on the plaques in the 3rd-floor corridor and whose re-election posters had been visible from the courthouse steps as recently as last spring. Benjamin had said, at that morning meeting, that he would review his intake procedure and left it there. He unlocked the front counter and turned the sign in the door window from closed to open and waited for the day to begin. It was mid-November. The windows along the east wall of the clerk's office caught the early light at a low angle that striped the floor with pale rectangles, and then, within an hour, went grey as the cloud cover came in off the ridge. The office was in the lower district courthouse, a building that had been renovated twice and still smelled faintly of the original plaster walls underneath the drywall. The public counter ran 12 feet across the front of the room, with a hinged section at the far left for staff entry and exit. Behind it were 4 desks, 2 filing cabinets, the stuck second drawer, a shelf of 3-ring binders, and a small electric kettle that belonged to Patrice. Patrice arrived at 8:45, unwound her scarf at the coat hooks and glanced at the envelope still sitting face down on the counter. She did not ask about it. She had worked alongside Benjamin for 4 of his 6 years, and she had learned to read the particular stillness he carried when something had happened that he was not going to speak about first. She set the kettle on and said, "Cold out," and he said, "It is." And that was the length of the exchange. The morning moved as mornings do in a county clerk's office in mid-November, which is to say it moved at the pace of people who had arrived at a place they would rather not be, carrying paperwork they had filled out 3 times, and still were not certain they had filled out correctly. Benjamin worked the counter. He answered questions. He checked form numbers against the intake list and handed back the ones that needed a notary stamp the person had not yet obtained. He directed an elderly man in a yellow windbreaker to the elevator for the second-floor records room, and when the man returned 12 minutes later, having taken the elevator to the 3rd floor instead, Benjamin walked him to the elevator himself and pressed the button for him. At 11:23, a man came through the front door, who did not carry the posture of someone arriving with a problem they needed solved. Most of the people who came through that door carried their purpose somewhere in their body, in the grip of a folder or the forward lean of someone whose time was being wasted by an institution that did not care about their time. This man wore a dark grey jacket over a collared shirt with no tie, carried a slim notebook, and moved at a pace that was neither hurried nor drifted. He was perhaps 40. He was not someone Benjamin had processed a form for before. He came to the counter, set his notebook on the surface in a way that was precise without being theatrical, and said, "I'm doing a procedural review of the intake workflow for the district office. I was told the public counter would be the right starting point." "It is," Benjamin said. "What kind of review?" "Operational, looking at the intake form sequence, the fee receipt log, the notice packets, how the steps connect." Benjamin nodded. "Do you need access to the back files, or are you working from the public-facing process?" "Public-facing for now." "Then I can walk you through the form sequence from the counter side. It takes maybe 20 minutes if you want to see it in motion rather than on paper." The man said that would be useful. Benjamin took him through it without abbreviating, showing the intake form categories, the numbering system, the point at which a submission moved from the counter to the desk for logging. The man took notes in the slim notebook with a pen that had been clicked to the open position before he even reached the counter. He asked 2 questions, both precise, neither of them easy to answer in a single sentence, which meant he already understood what the questions contained. Benjamin gave him full answers. When they were done, Benjamin said, "Was there anything in the sequence that looked like a gap?" The man said, "There's a step between intake and desk log where the form doesn't have a second handler signature. If an error occurs in that gap, the record shows 1 handler." "Yes," Benjamin said. He did not add anything to it. The man looked at him steadily for a moment, the way people look when they have heard not just the answer, but the weight behind it. Then he said, "Thank you for your time," picked up his notebook, and left. Patrice waited until the door had fully closed. "Consultant?" That's what he said. "Procedural review." She said it the way she said most things about the office's administrative structures, with a particular flatness that was not cynicism so much as long experience. "Audra know about it?" "I don't know," Benjamin said, and went back to the intake stack. He was not wrong to wonder. Audra appeared at the office door at 12:10, which was earlier than her usual post-lunch return, still wearing her coat. She scanned the room with the quick inventory look she had when she was accounting for something. Her eyes went to Patrice, then to the counter, then to the inter-office envelope still sitting face down on the laminate surface. "You received the notice," she said. "I did. The hearing will be scheduled by the end of the week. You'll want to prepare a response." She said it without inflection, the way she said most procedurally predictable things, as if the only question was whether the process would take 3 days or 4. Benjamin looked at her. "I'll review it." Audra picked up the envelope, turned it face up, and set it back down with the district letterhead visible. "Make sure the response is in writing. Verbal responses don't carry." She went to her desk. Patrice's eyes stayed on her kettle. The rest of that afternoon, Benjamin thought about the second handler signature gap the consultant had named without knowing its specific application. Or perhaps knowing. He had no way to tell which it was, and he did not find that uncertainty as destabilizing as he might have expected. Whatever the consultant had come to find, he had been here and asked and listened, and Benjamin had answered plainly, and that was the whole of what had happened. He filed the afternoon's intake forms, sorted the fee receipts into the receipt log, locked the front cabinet, and went home. The consultant came back on Thursday. He arrived just after 10, before the mid-morning rush of people who had taken the morning off work to deal with their paperwork. This time he carried a folder as well as the notebook, and he asked to see the fee receipt log from the past 60 days. Benjamin pulled the binder from the shelf, found the correct section, and set it on the counter. The man went through it with the careful patience of someone who was not skimming. While he worked, a woman arrived at the counter with a thick envelope and a look of exhausted determination. Benjamin took her intake form, walked her through the fee schedule, and noticed that she was missing a notarized attachment. He told her what she needed and which notary service operated 2 blocks from the courthouse. And when she said she'd already been there once and didn't know if they were open on Thursdays, he checked the number on the office resource sheet, pinned to the inside of the counter, and told her yes, they were open until 4. The consultant was watching this exchange without appearing to watch it. Benjamin was aware of the quality of attention in the room, the way you become aware of a change in the light, not intrusively, just present. When the woman left, the man said, without looking up from the binder, she forgot the notary stamp. She'll come back, Benjamin said. She already had everything else right. The man closed the binder. You get a lot of people who come back? Some. The ones who were almost there to begin with. He left at 11:15, and Benjamin discovered, after he had gone, that he had left a paper coffee cup on the far edge of the counter, half empty, still faintly warm against Benjamin's fingers when he reached for it. The hearing date arrived in writing on a Friday. The following Thursday at 2 in the afternoon, in hearing room 4, lower courthouse. Audra distributed the notice to Benjamin in the same inter-office envelope system, his name again at the bottom of the grid, the downstrokes pressed hard. The notice listed the presiding authority as the District Magistrate's office, which was standard for administrative misconduct hearings in the district. It listed the parties, the matter, and the date. It listed nothing else. Patrice read it over his shoulder, uninvited, and then moved back to her desk without a word about what it said. Benjamin folded it, put it in the front pocket of his bag, and finished logging the afternoon's receipts. The consultant's third visit was the following Monday. He came just before the lunch hour, and this time he sat on the wooden bench along the east wall for several minutes before Benjamin was free from the counter. Benjamin noticed him there in the low grey window light, notebook open on his knee, writing something unhurried. When the counter cleared, he waved him over. Back again, Benjamin said. The notice packet sequence. The man set his notebook on the counter. There's a form category in the system listed as NP7 that I can't find a corresponding procedural instruction for. Benjamin pulled the binder labelled Notice Packet Procedures from the shelf and opened it to the 7th tabbed section. The NP7 form was there, with its procedural instructions, but the instructions referenced an older counter numbering system that the office had updated 2 years prior. The reference was internally inconsistent in a way that would only become visible if you were looking at both the form and the instruction at the same time. That's a legacy reference, Benjamin said. The numbering changed in the year before last update cycle. Nobody flagged it for correction because the forms still work. The instruction just points to the wrong column header. That kind of error propagates, the man said. It does. Usually someone catches it in training. If they don't, it gets absorbed into practice and nobody knows what the written instruction actually says anymore. The man wrote something in his notebook. He wrote the way he listened, with an economy that had nothing performative in it. Benjamin said, "Have you been to the records room on 2? Not yet. The same legacy reference appears in the filing log up there. If you're mapping the inconsistencies, you'll want to see both." The man made a note. "I appreciate that." He stayed another 40 minutes. Patrice made tea and didn't offer him any, which was her way of registering that he was a formal presence, not a social one. He left just after 1. He did not leave the coffee cup this time. Benjamin found himself noticing the absence, which was not information exactly, and not information. The Wednesday before the Thursday hearing, Benjamin stayed an hour past closing. The office was empty by 5:30, and he had the room to himself. The low hum of the fluorescent lights, the occasional sound of the building settling in the cold. He spent the hour reviewing the Delmont filing in full, not building a case, not drafting a rebuttal. He was looking at what had happened cleanly, the way you look at a process when you want to understand where it went wrong without deciding in advance who was responsible. He spread the original intake form, the fee receipt, the sign-off log, and the deed acknowledgement on his desk, and read them in order. The intake form had his initials in the handler field. The sign-off log, which was the second step in the 2-step process the consultant had described as the gap, had Audra's signature. The deed acknowledgement had been filed to the wrong category index. The misfiling was in the category index, which was a step that occurred after the sign-off, at the desk logging stage, which was not Benjamin's stage. He sat with that for a while. He was not going to bring this to the hearing himself. That was not a decision he arrived at through strategy. He simply could not picture himself standing in hearing room 4 delivering a line-by-line accounting of another person's errors for the purpose of saving his own position. He could picture himself answering questions honestly, including answering questions about the sign-off log if anyone asked. He could picture himself standing in his own record without embellishment. The rest was not his to arrange. He put the documents back in their folder, locked the front cabinet, and left. He took the south exit, which led out to the side street running along the lower courthouse's exterior wall. The building vented heat from a grate at ground level near the base of the south wall, and in the cold evenings there was a warmth you could feel a few feet out. He stopped there, his bag over one shoulder, listening to the building's sound. Through the grate he could hear, from somewhere in the interior, a voice he recognized as Audra's. He did not move toward the grate. He did not lean in to hear better. He was standing in the place he always stood when he left by the south exit, and the voice was simply there. "Patrice, I need you to understand that this was never about correcting him," Audra was saying. The words were slightly muffled by the duct, but clear enough. "The record has always been the problem. A misconduct finding on file is reason enough. That's all this needed to be." A pause. Patrice's voice, lower, saying something he could not fully hear. "No," Audra said. "He won't push back. He never does." Benjamin stood still for another 2 or 3 seconds. The heat from the grate was against his shins. The street was empty except for a car idling at the far corner. He walked home. That night, he sat at his kitchen table with a glass of water and did not think about strategy. He thought about the 6 years at the counter and what they had contained. He thought about the man in the yellow windbreaker and the elevator button. He thought about the woman who had come back with her notary stamp 2 days after he had sent her off the first time, already knowing the form was right. He thought about Patrice and the way she made tea for herself, and not for anyone who made her feel like a formality. He thought about the consultant's notebook and the precise way it had been set on the counter surface the first time, He was not going to prepare a different version of himself for the hearing. He was going to prepare his files, which were already in order, and go. The consultant's fourth visit was the day before the hearing, late in the afternoon, past 3 o'clock. Benjamin was alone at the counter, Patrice having left early for a dentist appointment. The man came in and went to the counter and did not open his notebook immediately. "I wanted to check the notice packet mailing log from the past quarter," he said. Benjamin pulled it from the shelf. He set it on the counter and opened it to the current quarters section. While the man reviewed it, a teenager came in with a form for a court date name change. The form filled out in pencil, which was not acceptable, and Benjamin explained this without impatience, and gave him a pen from the cup near the register, and told him he could redo it right here at the counter, rather than having to go home and come back. The kid said he was sorry, and Benjamin said there was nothing to be sorry for, that it was an easy mistake, and watched him fill it out again. The consultant was watching again in that sideways way that was not sideways at all. Benjamin had noticed this about him across the 4 visits. The quality of his attention looked like absence, like a person who was noting things for a report, but it landed differently than that. It landed like recognition. Benjamin had no framework for what to do with that, so he had done nothing with it, which was what you did when you had no framework but still had a counter to run. When the teenager left, the man looked at the mailing log and made his last note for the day. He closed the notebook, clicked the pen, and said, "You've been here 6 years." 6 years, Benjamin said. "Is that the same as it was?" Benjamin thought about it. The forms changed twice. The system changed once. The people changed in the usual ways. The work is the same. The man nodded. He picked up his notebook and folder. He paused at the counter's edge, not dramatically, just with the pause of someone who has a thing to say and is deciding whether the moment warrants it. He said, "I'll see you tomorrow." Benjamin said, "All right." The man went out through the front door and the door swung shut behind him, and Benjamin stood at the counter for a moment before moving to close out the afternoon log. He thought about that sentence later, on the way home. It had the quality of a thing known rather than a thing guessed. He could have meant it in a dozen ordinary ways. He could have meant that the review would continue, that there was more to document, that he would be in the building. Benjamin folded the thought the same way he had folded the misconduct notice, carefully and without adding to it, and put it away. Thursday morning he arrived at the office at 7:50, 15 minutes earlier than usual. He went through the opening sequence, intake forms straightened, fee receipt log pulled from the locked cabinet, carafe filled. Patrice arrived at 8:40 and looked at him steadily when she hung her coat. "You look the same," she said. "I feel the same." "Good." She set the kettle on. "I want you to know I know where the sign-off log is." He looked at her. "I'm not going to do anything with it unless someone asks," she said. "But I know where it is." He said, "Thank you, Patrice," and meant it in a register that did not require elaboration. They worked the morning counter together until 1:30, when Patrice said she would hold the desk and he should go get ready, which for Benjamin meant retrieving his folder from his bag, which already held everything he needed. Hearing room 4 was on the second floor, accessed through the back corridor past the records room. It was a small room, not a courtroom in the formal sense, with a rectangular table, 6 chairs, a raised desk at the near end for the presiding authority, and 2 rows of seats along the wall for observers. The afternoon light came through high, narrow windows on the east wall. Audra arrived at 2:05, with Councilman Harlan Voss beside her. Harlan was a large man with a practiced ease in institutional settings, the ease of someone accustomed to rooms that arranged themselves around his presence. He wore a grey suit and held his own coat over one arm. He and Audra took the seats on the respondent side of the table, Audra placing her folder precisely in front of her. and Harlan settling into the chair with the unhurried weight of a man who expected a brief and conclusive formality. Benjamin sat on the opposite side of the table. He set his folder down without opening it. A court officer, a young woman named Tess, who Benjamin knew from the third-floor corridor, came in and placed a glass of water on each side of the table and took a position near the door. She looked at her clipboard, looked at the door, and said, "Magistrate Lewis will be in shortly." Audra's head came up. There was a fraction of a second where her expression did not yet know what to do with itself. Harlan said, "Mira Lewis?" Tess said, "Yes, sir." The door opened. The man who walked in was wearing a dark grey jacket over a collared shirt with no tie. He carried a slim notebook and a folder, and he set them on the raised desk with the same precise, untheatrical motion Benjamin had watched him use at the public counter for 4 visits, across 3 weeks. He looked at the room. He looked at Audra. He looked at Councilman Voss. He looked at Benjamin. Benjamin looked back. There was a moment of stillness in which the room's geometry seemed to rearrange itself, not dramatically, not loudly, but with the finality of a thing settling into its correct position after a long time in the wrong one. Benjamin felt the floor under the table, the press of the chair back, the weight of his folder under his hand. He did not say anything. He kept his face level and his breath even, the way he had kept himself at the counter every morning for 6 years, and let the room hold what it was holding. Audra's hand moved to the edge of her folder, stopped. Magistrate Mira Lewis sat down at the raised desk, opened his notebook to a marked page, and said, in the precise, measured voice Benjamin had heard ask about the second handler signature gap, "This is the administrative misconduct hearing in the matter of Clerk B. Lewis, filed by Senior Supervising Clerk Voss. Before we proceed to the formal complaint, I want to note for the record that the District Office's procedural review, conducted over the past 3 weeks, identified several relevant items." Audra said, "I wasn't informed that a procedural review was connected to this hearing." The review preceded the hearing. The connection became apparent during the review. He opened the folder alongside the notebook. "The Delmont property filing error was the subject of this complaint. I'd like to address the sign-off sequence for that filing." He laid a page on the table and turned it to face the room. It was a copy of the sign-off log. Audra's signature was visible in the relevant column without anyone needing to point it out. Harlan's posture, which had arrived in the room as settled authority, shifted by a small, telling degree. "The deed acknowledgement misfiling occurred at the desk logging stage," the magistrate said. "The desk logging stage falls after the sign-off. The sign-off log confirms the form passed through a second handler at that stage. The complaint's description of the error omits this step and attributes the misfiling entirely to the intake handler." Audra said, "The intake handlers." "I'm not finished." He said it without raising his voice, the same flat directness he had used at the counter every time he asked a question that required a complete answer. "The intake handler's record across 6 years includes a dozen acknowledged corrections, all of them minor, none of them involving the desk logging stage. The complaint characterizes the error as a pattern. The pattern is not supported by the record." Harlan said, "Mira, this is a..." "Councilman, this is an administrative hearing. If you'd like to speak to the procedural process afterward, I'm available." He set another page on the table. "This is the formal notice of dismissal for the complaint as filed. The record of Clerk Lewis will carry no misconduct finding. The office copy will reflect that the matter was reviewed and found unsupported." He set the page down flat and picked up a second document, a different form, one Benjamin did not recognize from the intake system. "A separate administrative review of the sign-off procedures and record attribution practices in this office has been opened as of this week. That review is ongoing. Supervising Clerk Voss, you'll receive notice of the review's scope and timeline through the district administrator's office. Audra's hand was still on the edge of her folder. She had not opened it. Her face had done what faces do when a script stops working. The controlled expression held a beat too long, then lost its certainty without finding anything to replace it. She looked at Harlan. Harlan was looking at the sign-off log copy on the table. He did not look up. The room was very quiet. The high windows let in the flat grey light of a November afternoon, and somewhere in the building, the elevator made its familiar sound rising to the 3rd floor. Magistrate Lewis closed the notebook. He looked at Audra with an expression that was not unkind and was not warm either. It was the expression of someone who has seen the thing clearly and is not going to pretend otherwise out of courtesy. "We're adjourned," he said. Tess opened the door. Harlan stood first, his coat already over his arm. He walked out of the hearing room without looking at his wife. The practiced ease was gone from his posture, replaced by something more careful. The gait of a man recalculating. Audra gathered her folder. She did not look at Benjamin as she stood. She took 4 steps toward the door and then stopped, not turning all the way around, just enough that her profile was visible. She looked at the sign-off log copy still lying on the table. Then she left. Tess gathered the water glasses. The magistrate was writing something brief in his notebook. Benjamin sat for a moment in the chair where he had spent the last hour. He said, "You could have told me." Mira Lewis looked up. He did not look apologetic, but he looked at Benjamin fully, the way he had looked at him across the counter on 4 separate mornings, and said, "The review had to be done from the same position the filing error had been done from. Anonymously, from the public-facing counter, with no prior relationship to the personnel." He set down his pen. "If I had told you, you would have changed how you answered my questions." "I would have been more careful," Benjamin said. "Yes." Benjamin thought about that. "I answered the same way I would have answered anyone." "I know," Mira said. "That's the review." Benjamin picked up his folder and stood. At the door he paused and said, "The NP7 form, the legacy reference in the instruction." I noted it. "The records room on 2 has the same reference." I noted that too. Benjamin went out through the hearing room door, down the corridor, past the records room, and took the elevator back to the 1st floor. The elevator opened into the back hall of the clerk's office. Patrice was at her desk when he came through the inner door. She looked at his face, the way she had looked at it for 4 years, reading the thing beneath the thing. "Well," she said. It was dismissed. She held very still for a moment. Then she stood up from her desk and said, "I'm making tea," and went to the kettle. And the sound it made, filling from the tap, was the most ordinary sound in the world. Benjamin walked to the front counter. The office was closed for the afternoon session, the window signs still unclosed, from when Patrice had flipped it after he left for the hearing. He stood at the counter, both hands resting flat on the laminate surface, and felt the familiar grain of it against his palms. The intake forms were squared in their tray. The fee receipt log was closed in its binder on the shelf. The fluorescent tube above the waiting area was mid-cycle in its flicker. Everything in the room was exactly where he had left it. On the far edge of the counter, near the window-facing end, in the spot where the light from the east windows reached furthest in the morning, there was a faint ring in the laminate where moisture had sat and dried. It was the exact circumference of a paper coffee cup. He had not wiped it away. He did not know when he had decided not to wipe it away. He was fairly certain the decision had been made without being made, the way some things are kept without announcement. He stood at the counter in the flat November light and let the quiet of the room settle around him, and after a while Patrice brought him a cup of tea, without asking whether he wanted one, and he wrapped both hands around it and stood there belonging to the room the way he had always belonged to it. Only now the room knew.